Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the summit. Once again, my name is Martina Avera, and I'm going to be taking you through today's episode. And we're going to be exploring various dynamics. And as usual, always get to have a deep dive into the country's remarkable journey towards a prosperous future. Now, tonight we are honored to host three distinguished students from Harvard University who have been in Rwanda for about a week now, exploring its cutting-edge development initiatives as well as learning from the country's strategic approach to growth. So today I have with me none other than Leila Hamidi, who is a Master of Public Administration, as well as a candidate at the Harvard Kennedy School of Governance, focusing on governance and public policy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, we also have Jordan Thomas, who is a student at Yale Law School and Harvard Business School, specializing in law and business. Thank you for being here, Thomas.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we have Prem Budsaratragoon, who is a Master in Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you very much for being here. So during their time here in Rwanda, they were able to visit various institutions like RDB Rwanda Development Board, Africa Leadership University, the Ministry of ICT and Innovation, the Zipline Distribution Center, and many others. And they were able to see firsthand how Rwanda is creating innovative solutions, both in business, governance, technology, and various other sectors. And we are very excited to be hearing from them, as well as hearing their insights on the Rwanda's impressive development and how these initiatives are shaping a brighter future for the country. And we cannot wait to hear from them. Thank you once again for being here, and we cannot wait to hear from you.
Thank you.
Yes, so we're going to be starting off with a general question. This goes to everyone, but we'll take turns to answer. You've had a chance to explore Rwanda's impressive developments across various sectors. I can start off with you, Leila. What was your overall impression of Rwanda's transformation, and what stood out to you the most during your visit here?
Well, first and foremost, the scenery is something that I couldn't have imagined. Even, just looking it up online, being here in person is the first thing that really takes you away, is just the breathtaking beauty. We really got a whirlwind tour of various ministries and all of the development, and to see, for example, all of the green building that is happening. That is something that I'm quite interested in. My background is jointly in art and architecture. And so to see how Rwanda is thinking about development, not only in terms of progress for the country, but recognizing the sustainability aspect of it is just so impressive.
Yes, and I'm sure, like you said, you did look up the city or the country in general before you visited. Did some of the things surpass your expectations? Were you looking forward, or did you see it as you imagined, or seeing the different things that you were seeing online? Was it what you actually envisioned or imagined, or it was even beyond?
So I really came in kind of fresh, without very many expectations. I can say that at the Kennedy School, my class, we have 260 students, half are international. So I have so many colleagues from the continent here, and it's a very global program, but in terms of expectation, let's say I came in fresh.
Yeah.
And it's evident how much work has gone into just the development, the roads, the cleanliness of it, the amount of construction that is happening. It's very evident that it is a city and a nation on the cusp of extreme expansion and growth, and that is compelling.
Thank you very much for that. Over to you, Jordan. What were some of your impressions in terms of the transformational journey that Rwanda has experienced, and what is something that stood out for you during your visit here?
So it's really been a pleasure being here. I'm taking a course called Africa Rising with Professor Akim Bello-Osage at the Harvard Business School and several other schools who are also allowed to cross-register. And so we had a bit of a taste of various nations in Africa, and we actually had done a case study on Rwanda the week prior to arriving here. And so we were well aware of some of the cultural dynamics, some of the economic dynamics, the political situation, the history, certainly the genocide against the Tutsi. And so we had a general overview, but I think that unfortunately for many Americans, and perhaps on the international stage generally, Rwanda is thought of in terms of safari, mountain gorillas, and the 1994 genocide. And I think that what's been so empowering and so inspiring for me being here is seeing the true story, the true narrative, allowing Rwanda through what we've experienced to paint its own picture of really what defines this nation and its people. And it's really been beautiful. To Layla's point, the development is absolutely remarkable. I think it was very powerful that we actually started day one by visiting the Kigali Genocide Memorial, because you can't understand the current situation, the current landscape, and all the contours and the complexity of what makes this country so beautiful without understanding where it's had to come from over just the past 30 years. But then we visited the Rwandan Development Board, we visited the Kigali Innovation City, we visited African Leadership University, Carnegie Mellon University, and realized there's a real sense of a bubbling ferment here, that there's so much progress that's been made in changing the narrative, in improving the conditions over the past 30 years, and that it's only getting started. And so for me, I think the biggest impression was really recognizing there's something incredibly special happening here, and it's something deeply rooted in the people. Yeah. I think that it's almost inconceivable to think about in the past 30 years what Rwanda has built, what it had to come from, and how far it's gone and where it's going is something that no matter how much I studied it in a course at Harvard prior to getting here, could not be prepared for. And I've just been so grateful for all of the different experiences that we've had, whether it be Zipline or Irembo and all of the other ministries that Layla mentioned that we've spoken to. There's just a real sense that there's a full commitment to making Rwanda the nation of the future. And it's really, I think, defining this Africa rising perception of the continent as well.
Yeah, one would say the course that you did learning about the country that you were about to visit was very timely, and there is learning about it, but there's also experiencing the country firsthand and learning about the history and changing the narrative that is very commonly misunderstood out there in the world. What would you say is the importance of actually being in the moment, or seeing things for yourself and understanding and learning about a country's history firsthand, instead of just taking people's word for it, especially when things are being generalized, some information gets lost in the wind. So how important was it for you to learn firsthand about the history, about all the different changes that this country has made in terms of transformation and building itself up back again after the 30 years, what happened 30 years ago?
It's remarkably important. I think that it's helpful to study things beforehand. I think it's helpful to have some level of summary of what happened, so that people can understand in a general way on an international stage. But you don't, through those summaries or through those snapshots, really get all the complexity. And I think, again, just speaking about day one, event number one, going to the Kigali Genocide Memorial, you get the full story that I just speaking for myself, had never been told. And I think it's laid out so beautifully as you walk through the memorial. You see the pre-colonial period, you see the colonial period, you see the 1990s and particularly what happened in 1994, and then you see the sort of regeneration and the rebuilding process post-1994. And to have it laid out so beautifully in 4 stages like that was a complexity to the narrative that I had never heard. You know, in many ways, I think on the international stage, we simply get just dropped, parachuted into 1994 as if it was an isolated moment in history and it just happened. And I think until you understand the history and until you understand what you had to build from, you don't really appreciate where Rwanda is today. It's not enough to simply say, okay, this happened in 1994, here we are today. No, you have to really appreciate how incredible it is where we are today. You have to understand not only what happened in 1994, but what led up to it, what happened immediately after it. So the full complexity is something that I think you can only get by coming and seeing it with your own eyes and having the story told directly by those who lived it. And that's exactly what we've seen here is, you know, the Kigali Genocide Memorial tells the story in the way that the Rwandan people, and especially the people who are most affected, want the story to be told, and that's incredibly powerful.
Thank you very much, Jordan, for that. Over to you, Prim. What are some of the overall impressions that you had in terms of Rwanda's transformational journey, as well as some of the few things that stood out for you during your visit?
Yeah, so similar to Jordan, I took a class about economic development in Africa, and like we went through many like cases on project that some country government have done, and we went through some project that Rwandan government have done, and I felt like reading it through cases, like I only saw like one perspective of it. I saw like the GDP grow, but I still like couldn't really see how it affected the people. And I think being here, like I get to see how like the policy actually help the people in the country. And I think one thing that I was really impressed by is the vision that everyone share here. I think it's not just the people who work for the government. I think it's also the local people, the people in the NGO or even like in the corporate industry. Like everyone share the same vision. Like they want this country to prosper. And I think that also comes from the history that Rwanda experienced. And yeah, I think I was really impressed by the 2050 vision that every organization we talk to, like they mention it and they talk about their way of achieving it. And yeah.
Thank you very much to you, Prim. Back to you, Leila. So from a governance and public administration standpoint or a point of view, Rwanda is often lauded for its effective leadership as well as policies that it has put up. How do you think the country has managed to maintain a strong governance and sustain a long-term development while ensuring inclusivity in an angle of what you have seen so far in the 1 week that you have been here? I'm sure you might have not have seen it all, but the snapshots of what you were able to see in your perspective, how do you think Rwanda has been able to maintain that strong governance as well as sustain a long-term development whilst ensuring inclusivity?
So I'll start by sharing a little bit of my background.
Yes, please.
So I have roughly a 20-year career in the arts and architecture that precedes my attendance at Harvard Kennedy School in the Masters of Public Administration program. And so much of my own research and interest is rooted in the intersection of how that interfaces with public life. Particularly a course that I took that has really shaped my thinking now called Reckoning with History. Mm-hmm. You know, so looking at post-conflict recovery and the role of arts and culture in that. So what I observe is a nation through self-determination that has authored a remarkable recovery story 30 years afterwards, that anyone who steps foot here can feel that immediately. The policies, candidly, I mean, we're going to see all of these ministries and businesses. It's very focused on tech development, even the universities, you know, Carnegie Mellon University and the focus on AI, you know, preparing for what everyone has been calling the fourth industrial revolution. That's all very evident. And so 1 week is not enough. Yeah. You know, and that's why, you know, I can at least say for myself that I've come here. I've been interested in the story of Rwanda for 20 years, you know, after encountering an article in the New Yorker that talked about the 10-year story. And so I think recovery, from what I understand, it happens in generations. And so here's one generation, and here's what you've been able to do and how magnificent that is. But then what happens to the next generation and after that? And so I have more questions than I have answers, but I'm just so happy that I've been able to come here and experience it firsthand, and as much as I can, engage with the people. Yeah.
That's definitely more of an incentive to come back and learn more and spread the word about the transformation journey, but also have your questions out there for people to answer them, especially us as Rwandans, because as much as you have had your 1 week visit here, it was enlightening, but also it left you even more curious. So it's definitely a journey towards filling that gap and understanding more. Yeah, so over to you, Jordan. As a student focused both in law and business, you've seen Rwanda's growing business landscape through the various institutions that you were able to visit, including places like Kigali International Financial Center. How would you assess the country's business climate and its attractiveness to maybe global investors?
I think it's incredibly attractive. I think that you look at the stability in the country, and that's incredibly attractive to international capital flowing in. There's a real sense that if you're patient with your capital, and especially in the real estate, if you look at Kigali Innovation City, there's a development plan that you trust will actually be fulfilled. That's a real challenge in developing nations, and I think it scares international investors sometimes. You worry about if you were to early on put your capital into a project, will it be finished? Will there be a political uprising of some sort? Will there be social upheaval? Will there be just economic downturn? But I think there's a real sense that across all major pillars, social, political, economic, there's stability here. There's a vision, there's a plan. We talk about Rwanda 2050, Africa 2050. There's a real sense that there are aggressive targets and there are goals along the way to actually achieve that vision, whether it come from the Kigali International Financial Center or elsewhere. Everybody seems very aligned on achieving that 2050 vision, and there's a real track record, again, remarkable considering that what happened just 30 years ago, but the real track record of achieving these targets. And so we had learned about, before it was the 2050 vision, it was a 2025 vision. Very aggressive targets were set, and they were, if not met, they were only shortly or only slightly missed. And so we talked about a 10% growth plan, and they achieved 8%. Now they are aiming for 12%, which would be unprecedented. And they're saying, well, even if we fall short, we'll reach 10%, which would, again, still be unprecedented. And so you can look at the past as an indicator of what the future economic situation and growth and development projection will be. And I think that's incredibly attractive to international investors. And it goes to Layla's point also to an institutional infrastructure that's already been set in place here. There's a real sense of collaboration amongst all the ministries. It's a real sense of alignment between the president and the prime minister. For Americans, we find that very strange. We're very used to having a very strong president, and they don't have to work with the prime minister of any sort, but this is a different presidential system, and there's a real sense of a vision, an alignment, a track record that's already proven successful, and I think that everybody's charging forward, and international investors should be incredibly encouraged by what they're seeing here, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see a huge flow of international capital in the next few years.
Thank you very much. Over the past few years, Rwanda has definitely tried to portray itself as a business hub, and doing that through various startups, encouraging people to get into fintechs and whatnot. And some might call it being way too ambitious, because we are still a development country, and a country that really suffered one of the worst atrocities known to mankind during our history. Do you believe that there's such a thing as being too ambitious, especially in terms of an African country like this trying to change its narrative and trying to better itself, especially for its people?
No, I don't think there's such a thing as being too ambitious. I think that you want to set high expectations, and it's really that concept of aim for the moon, and if you miss, you'll reach the stars. And I think this is a nation, again, just looking at the history over the past 30 years of its rebuilding plan, where that's exactly what it's done, and it needed to. It was coming from a place of, as you mentioned, a devastation, of tragedy, of mourning and loss. And it was incredibly ambitious at the time to set its 2025 agenda. It was thought that it was inconceivable to be able to meet those targets. And just look at where we stand now in 2025, how much was accomplished, how many people were lifted out of poverty, the political stability, the ability for people to feel like there's a real sense of pride and future in being Rwandan, repatriation from people who had been abroad, people sending back money from abroad. There's a real sense of wanting to contribute to the vision, and a sense of cohesion here. There's a real sense of unity. And it's incredibly inspiring coming from America, where we're not quite united right now. Yeah. We're actually incredibly divided. I think it's really beautiful when you see so many people buying into the vision. So why not set high expectations? When you have a foundation that seems as promising and really as bubbling as Rwanda. There's just something that's happening here that's laid an incredible groundwork for growth and development. I think you should set high expectations because you have the star power and all of the infrastructural support networks that you need to really meet it. So you aim for the moon.
Thank you very much for that.
I want to jump in and just add something to that, because I think your question was just so interesting, I couldn't resist, which is there
By all means.
too much ambition? Certainly there could be, right? I don't think there is, but it's a hypothetical question, of course, at the expense of what? But I wanted to mention, so when we went and we met with the Minister of the ICT yesterday, we're talking about the kind of digital literacy gap, right? So you have like one version that you're addressing, which is getting the whole nation working and fluent on using the internet, technology, apps, and then parallel track, you know, reaching for the sky to try to become one of the leading edge competitors in this AI thing. And so I think that you absolutely can hold complexity and do both at the same time. And that also goes in with what we've been hearing time and again, which is, you know, thinking big. And so that's just one thing that I wanted to add to that.
Yeah, as well as doing hard things, honestly. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And back to you, Prim. During your visit here or your stay here, you were able to interact with various policy makers, visited key institutions, and experienced Rwanda's development journey up close. From your perspective as a policy student, is there something that you have seen here that you think other countries could be able to learn from?
Yeah, I think one thing I really impressed about is how the government build trust and confidence with the people. So when we met with the Ministry of Justice, and also the Ministry of Education, they talk about how when they carry on a policy, they try to think about how to make sure they can impact the mass population and also how to use the tax well. And from my understanding, Rwanda is able to raise tax and not have any like political uprising, or like citizens are willing to chip in their money and they trust the government to use the money well. And I think that's one thing other countries can learn from, is like how to build trust with the citizens and how to create transparency in the government system. They also mentioned how there's a KPI system that the minister and the government agency need to meet their expectation. Like if they set big goals, they should be able to achieve it or explain how like they fall short for the goal they set. So I think this is like very important, especially for developing countries. Like we need good public policy, and to be able to create good public policy, I think tax is one, like public finance is a very important aspect. Like how do you manage the money that people trust you to manage, and yeah, like how to manage it well and build confidence with the people.
Yeah, you did talk about transparency and also good governance and the importance of that. What do you think that contributes in terms of development, in terms of having the people of the country trusting the government and vice versa, and having a good relationship, the citizens and the government, those that are creating these policies?
Like how it,
the importance of having,
yes. I think it's like the North Star. Like you need this to create development, especially economic development. Like if you're creating like the economic project or like the economic zone, if people are seeing the money are not distributed equally, I feel like that would create a lot of uprising and then like a lot of inequality. And being able to build trust and explain to the citizen how the project would affect them, their family, their daily life, it's like a very important part about doing economic policy, I think, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Back to you, Leila. Funny you spoke about bridging the digital literacy gap. It was in line with my next question. You were, from a public administration perspective, or in general, you were able to visit various institutions like the Zipline Distribution Center. First of all, you can tell us your impressions on that, but how do you evaluate Rwanda's use of technology, particularly through such initiatives, as well as improving the healthcare and logistics across the country?
I'm so glad you asked about healthcare, because every time there's a question, I'm like holding it in my head. So I know from a colleague who works for the health ministry in South Africa, how much of a template Rwanda has created with their public health system. That's quite impressive. In terms of technology, Ampersand is brilliant and also fun to ride the motorcycles if you're brave enough to do that. Yeah. And I think there was another one that I was thinking of that just escaped me. That's quite all right. I think, but to the point of building trust, I think it's evident in the fact that you're able to get health insurance at an affordable rate. Like that builds, that transparency and trust builds over time, so that the next thing and the next thing can take place. And it, from our perspective at least, I would say that it seems to be working quite well.
Thank you very much for that. And over to you, Jordan. Rwanda's private sector has been growing rapidly, and I'm sure you were able to see just a snippet of that, especially through initiatives like Smart Africa and the Kigali Special Economic Zone. What key lessons can other African nations probably learn from Rwanda's policies on innovation and economic growth, or vice versa? What are some of the things that we can be able to learn from other countries to contribute to the economic growth?
I think that Rwanda's recognized that it's in a key state of transition. I think that there's a sense of how important an agrarian economy has been in Rwanda, and there's a real sense that this is the time in its development journey where it wants to really jump the curve from developing in a primarily agrarian and government-invested key industry way to really starting to have a private sector, startup, fintech, and exciting tech-driven development journey. And you see this happening in many developing nations. At some point, you need to shift from being primarily driven through an agrarian economy and government sort of key industry, telecoms and water systems, what have you, energy production, to really starting to have it be more organically driven through tech unicorns that can really try to create the future of digital transformation in the country. And that was the story in so many other nations. Singapore, for instance, had to make that transition. And I think that you see a similar vision in Rwanda. I think Rwanda, in many ways, is trying to position itself as the Singapore of Africa. And I think it's incredibly well poised to do so through, as you mentioned, Smart Africa. You see Nashkin. We went to the Nashkin co-working space, and it's one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen. People are typing away on their laptops. They're chugging away at their cafe mochas and their lattes, and they're doing incredibly work to build what may be the future Google, the future Amazon, the future Zipline, and what have you of Rwanda. And there's no sense of what the limit is when you're creating that infrastructure and that support system and making those investments in what could be those incredibly powerful digital drivers and tech-driven drivers of the future. I will say there's also a sense that the agrarian economy doesn't need to be left behind. It just needs to be more tech-driven, innovative, and efficient and productive. And so you see a lot of investments. Also, I think RDB has a tremendous vision for how to make what's already a very functional farming system in Rwanda even more productive, and to build its export systems through a lot of what already are great goods that it exports, tea and coffee, et cetera. So when you look at that, I think that we're playing two different games here. On the one hand, you want to shore up what already are incredibly burgeoning and incredibly foundational pillars of the economy, while starting to lay a foundation that will create the digital infrastructure for a tech giant to come out of Rwanda in the future. And when you're playing both of those and you're doing so very well in the ways that the RDB and the Kigali International Financial Center have done, they've already set in place regulatory changes that I think also make international investment into the country incredibly attractive. VC capital, I think, will be attracted to startups that are coming out of Rwandan-based founders. When you're playing both of those games well, and Rwanda is, you should be incredibly excited for the future.
Thank you very much for that. And back to you, Prem. This trip has been all about connecting or aligning what you have studied in class and what's happening on the ground. And through that, how has being in Rwanda shifted or influenced what you think about policy making, especially in an African context?
I think from my experience here, I felt like I see the importance of good governance when it comes to economic policy, and I also see the importance of collaboration between government agency or like government agency with private sector. I think it's very important because coming from a background in the central bank, I had seen a lot of miscommunication between government organization and other agency, and I think to see how Rwandan government works together, like every agency are just aligned in one goal, and they're ready to collaborate with each other. Like for example, like there's economic development policy that RDB had been doing. And I think they wouldn't be able to accomplish it without the Ministry of Education coming up with all the educational policy and trying to improve the education of the people in Rwanda. So I think that's like one thing that I learned from Rwanda.
All right, thank you very much. This next question, any one of you can feel free to pitch in, but I can start off with you, Leila. You've explored Rwanda's education and leadership initiatives, including visiting Africa Leadership University, Carnegie Mellon University. What are your thoughts on Rwanda's role in cultivating future leaders, and how do you see this affecting Africa's development on a broader scale?
Yeah, so a small group of us did go to Carnegie Mellon University and got a chance to meet with the students, who are just remarkable in terms of who they are and how they got to, you know, be these exemplar students in this institution. African Leadership University was also compelling because part of my question for Professor Crenshaw was, so you're teaching business and you're using case studies from, let's say, Harvard Business School. How are you taking the lessons learned of the mistakes they have made and integrating it into an African context? And I feel that I was very satisfied with the answer, that they are doing that and they are adapting it to the African context. I will pivot and become an evangelist for what I'm here for, which is arts, culture, design. The thing that's quite compelling about that university is how beautiful it is. And then also Norskin was designed by the same architectural firm, and that a small group of us did a side trek to go to visit Mass Design Studio. And I think as a nation that's developing so rapidly, this importance of like beautiful space and what can be incubated there, it matters so much. It matters so much that we are humans and physical bodies that respond to beautiful physical space, and that you can also build that much more affordably than it happens in the West. Where it's almost like a luxury item, but you know, as you're developing in this new vision, I'm seeing that that's happening, and it's so exciting.
Yeah, speaking of that, I have visited the universities, and you can tell from African University, African Leadership University, the importance of arts and culture to them, from the murals and the paintings on the walls, and from an arts and culture perspective, that industry is still developing here in Rwanda, and but how would you describe the role of arts and culture in terms of Rwandans using it to change the narrative of their story, or using it as an inspiration to tell their story in a more inspiring and captivating way?
I think what arts and culture can do is twofold. I think it can be part of a creative economy, and that's necessary and important. And I think the other thing that it does is that art, the second you try to define it, it moves and it becomes something else. I think art, the capacity that it has is to be part of a moral reimagining and a retelling of history. And as I said, I feel that that work of post-conflict recovery is a generations-long effort. I'll just reweave back a little bit, which is that the economic stimulation part, when we went to Norskin, we learned that the tiles there on the facade were locally sourced. That was an industry that didn't exist. You know, Mass Design Studio went, you know, upwards, you know, into like a more rural place, an hour and a half, where there was someone who just as a hobby was making clay, but that person now, that, you know, is making those clay tiles for everyone. And so much of the work that they source is creating new local economies that didn't exist. So that interplay of both the creative economy stimulation and what it can do in terms of the moral framing is so important. And I think it takes time to develop. And I think there are ways that it can develop that then become, let's say, less useful, like if it becomes, you know, only part of like a luxury commodity, something like that, versus a place for critical thought and production. I'll just add also that I'm Iranian American. I'm born and raised in the States, but like if you look at Iranian cinema and what that does relative to kind of their post-recovery story and what it, just how important that is. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And over to you, Jordan, in terms of what your thoughts are on Rwanda's role in cultivating future leaders and how you see this affecting Africa's development on a broader scale.
I think it's incredibly important to continue making investments in leadership generally, but particularly through the channel of education, which I think you see it. You visit the Kigali Innovation City and you see three, or I should say four, incredibly strong pillars that inspire confidence for the future. You see Carnegie Mellon University, you see the University of Rwanda, you see the African Leadership University, and you see AIMS, the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. And it's not simply the presence of these universities there, but the clear commitment to starting to develop the best and the brightest who are going to lead forward not only Rwanda, not only Africa, but the world. It was said to us that AIMS truly believes that the next Albert Einstein is going to come out of Africa, and it's going to come out of AIMS right here in Rwanda. And when you have that level of investment into a knowledge economy that is going to not only bring incredibly fruits to this nation, but really then to changing the world and showing, again, to your earlier point on can international investors feel confident bringing capital into Africa, showing through the brain power and the talent that you are not only developing here and placing in leadership positions here, but then exporting to the world, showing people Rwanda is developing the best and the brightest of any nation in the world. You really allow further development to come into the country because now people feel like this is a place where they want to visit, this is a place where they want to move, this is a place where they want to set up businesses, it's a place where they want to invest from abroad. And so it all is a really beautiful, virtuous cycle that I think starts with continuing to make those investments in education, and it's starting right there in those four universities that you can see so prominently. And so I think it's inspiring. I think there's also a sense that you need to continue to innovate, and so I was very inspired in visiting Carnegie Mellon University. The curricula, the way that they're thinking about entrepreneurship, the way that they're thinking about setting at least one semester where students can actually go and study at Carnegie Mellon in the United States and learn about how innovation works and entrepreneurship and engineering works in other contexts, and so that you're being dynamic. As you mentioned, it's not only about what lessons Rwanda has for other nations, which I think is many, but also what Rwanda could continue to learn from other nations. And that open-mindedness is not always present in a national context, but here it's incredibly palpable. And the universities are embodying it at the highest level in how they train their students. And so these students are going to be global-minded. They're going to be incredibly prepared to take the world by storm. And I just can't wait to see that future Albert Einstein that comes out of Rwanda.
We definitely all can't wait. Thank you for that. And Prim, your thoughts?
For me, I think so for a country to industrialize, I think you need both head and hands. So it's not just the higher education that Rwanda has, but Rwanda also have the vocational schools for people to learn specific skill set that they can use for the manufacturing industry. Or I think this is an important part that I was really impressed about Rwanda, that the government is promoting vocational school and providing pivot track from vocational school to higher education if student wanted one. But I think vocational school is a really important part of development, and it helped boost the efficiency of the industry. And also I think one thing that the Minister of Education talked about is how there's no stigma against vocational school here. People are happy going to vocational school, learning specific skill set for the industry they're interested in, and they're able to get a job right after they graduate from vocational school. So I think that's a really important part of the education system here as well.
Thank you very much, Prim.
I just want to add in on that. So I have a classmate who is part of the education school. She's getting her doctorate and looking at, as an example, the education system in America, and she has this tagline that's very compelling, which is she wants to get rid of the 12th grade.
Oh.
Right? But to do that vocational system, and I have family in Switzerland, and that's exactly what they do there as well. And I think that that's yeah, that there is no stigma, and that you need all types of kind of educational levels and vocational training, like especially for a small nation, then you can fulfill like the full needs of what the society is in need of. Yeah.
Like to add on to that, so I'm from Thailand. We also have vocational school, but it's not seen as the popular track for many students because I think one thing it's in our country, it's harder to get a job with a vocational degree, and so there's a big stigma against going to vocational school. But here, I think because like there's proof that people are able to get jobs and people are able to make a living from vocational school, and I think vocational schools are also a really good option because it takes less time and you're able to secure like a specific skill set. You don't need to go through like 4 years of university, and I think it's a good option for many developing countries that are looking to industrialize their economies too. Yeah.
No, honestly, we do feel you on that because vocational schools does have a sort of stigma surrounding it, especially those that think it's for the underprivileged or people who didn't go to school, who are not educated, because it's more of a physical work and whatnot. But the number of students enrolling in vocational schools is increasing here in Rwanda, and it's due to the shift in the narrative, as well as investing in the schools, as well as helping people understand that it is also part of the future, and giving each and every person an opportunity to understand more about it, as well as giving them the choice. So it's definitely a journey, but we're getting there. Yeah. So Jordan didn't talk about briefly the visit to the Kigali Genocide Memorial, but from your perspective, from your visit to Kigali Genocide Memorial and the history of Rwanda, how has the country's journey of healing and unity shaped its current trajectory of progress, in your opinion? And how do you think this history influences Rwanda's policies today?
It's the biggest question.
Okay.
But I will say that that the 1 week is so short. I could easily, and I am considering potentially a PhD that is looking at the field of collective memory and the role of the arts, right? So my experience of that space was that how do you contain that amount of grief, right? How do you process that? And what I also know is that there's a forthcoming museum in February, which is the Heroes Museum, right? So that will become a companion to it. I'll answer the question by telling a story of how I even got on this path of interest, which is, you know, for 4 years I managed the architecture school at UCLA, where the chair of our department was a Japanese architect. I went to Japan just out of my own curiosity, and he happened to be there with a group of 10 students and another professor. The other professor, architectural historian, rerouted my travels, and he said, go to Hiroshima. That was the first time that I went to a place that I would call a site of memory. And they have had decades longer to process this history, and so many ways that they commemorate it. So again, I will say that I think it's generations long of work, and that for 30 years out, it's so essential that that space exists, and also how rare it is to have a nation that has experienced that atrocity and immediately addresses it rather than denies it. That's not normal, right? So I'm grateful to be here with this very niche interest that I have, to be able to come here and experience it. I'm moved by it, and I know that there's more. I know that there's more that individuals do. The gachachas, I feel like, are also part of this really profound history, and also part of your layered question of what's the African way of doing it, right? Like, what a project of human imagination and moral imagination to do that. And that's part of it as well, even though it's not in the museum. Like, that's part of that story.
Thank you very much for that. As we draw near to the end of the show, unfortunately, we can start off with you, Jordan. After your time here in Rwanda, what do you believe are the most promising aspects of the country's development model that other nations could adopt from, but vice versa as well? And where do you see Rwanda in the next 10 to 15 years? I know that's a bit congested. especially because you have only been here for a week, but from what you have observed and what you were able to see.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I think one of the most promising is building the knowledge economy. I think continuing to make investments in higher education, also continuing through the Ministry of Education to expand educational opportunity across the nation, and making sure that, including in the rural regions, students feel empowered, or I should say children feel empowered to enroll and to start learning how to function in what is a developing economy that will be ripe with opportunity, but you want to make sure that that opportunity is, to the extent possible, equitably distributed. And I think that it's incredibly powerful to see a government that's so intent on trying to maintain that level of equity and that level of distributed opportunity, because that's not common. And we know that in many other parts of the world, you can have incredibly promising developing economies that, for whatever reason, have not been as keen on limiting inequality. And so that, I think, is very important, very promising. I think that continuing to develop in infrastructure, especially in the rural parts of the nation, will be important. There's a real sense of what's possible by looking at Kigali and looking at other major cities, but it's going to be important, again, to just make sure that that development continues to happen regionally, as equitably as possible. And we've been told that that's already happening in telecom, it's happening in internet development and digital speed. I was told that we want to jump from 5G to all sorts of other fiber technologies underground that are state of the art, to make sure that internet speed is high powered in every part of the nation, because that internet connectivity is going to be the ferment and the foundation for other parts of digital transformation and digital access and learning opportunity, et cetera. So I think there's a real sense of how infrastructure needs to be a central part of the equation here, continuing to attract financial capital from abroad, setting in place a shift, as I mentioned, from a more agrarian economy and major industry-backed economy into a sort of organic, startup fuel, tech-based, digital powered economy. All of these things, I think, lead you to believe that in the next 10 to 15 years, this narrative, as I mentioned, of Rwanda being the Singapore of Africa is attainable. And I think that that's why I've been so inspired by being here, is just recognizing to see where it's come in the past 30 years is truly remarkable. It seems to many people unimaginable. And so now you actually can imagine what the next 30 years will look like. And I'm sure that because we've come so far, we can only go further. Yeah. And so I'm incredibly inspired, not just by the next 10 to 15, but truly the next 30. I think this is going to be an incredible place to live, an incredible place to work. I think you're going to see people from abroad really actually wanting to come to Rwanda, not just to visit, but to stay. I think you will see a real sense of Rwanda is the place to be.
Thank you for that. To you, Prim, same question goes to you.
Yeah, I think, so at Kennedy School, we have done like many cases on government policy, and I think one shortfall that many government has is implementation, but I think for Rwandan government, they're really good with implementing their policy, and I think that comes with good governance and come with a lot of transparency toward the people, and I think that's what other nations can learn from them, and also that's what gave me hope about this economy and this like society. So I agree with Jordan that like from like the proof that we've seen, like what you could have done in like 25 years, like I think in the next 30 years it's gonna be even more like accelerated growth from here. Like it's not just gonna be like a linear growth, like you guys are gonna just jump up, just like Singapore and many countries that they can jump from developing nations to like a first world country. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Prim. And I think we should be done with the tough questions. Sadly, the visit has come to an end. Thank you very much for visiting our beautiful country. So I would like each one of you to give me a highlight of the trip, and what is the first thing that you're going to tell someone when you go back home about your visit here. So we'll start with you, Leila.
One thing that I forgot to answer was how much the party vibes at Zipline were like amazing.
Yeah, you had a good time.
And like if they need any drone launchers, like I'm available as of May 30th.
Thank you for that. And you, Jordan, a highlight of your trip, and what is the first thing that you're going to tell someone when you go back home?
I'm someone, when I travel, given my background, of course, I'm going to be looking at the legal structures in the country as a law student and a law nerd. I'm going to be looking at the economic development and the private sector's intersection with other parts of the economy as a business student. So that's been wonderful, and we talked about all of that. I'm also, just as a person and a foodie, I'm going to look into the culinary scene.
Yeah.
And I've just loved the Rwandan food that we've had. We've had goat bruschette, we've had agatogo, matoke.
How was that for you?
Oh, I loved it. I
did?
absolutely loved it. So this is my second time in Africa. My
Okay.
first time was just a couple months ago, actually, in Ghana. And that was the first time I got introduced to the concept of a swallow.
The
And
fufu?
Yeah, we had fufu.
Okay.
And then I came here and I had the sambasa with ugali.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this reminds me of fufu or like a banku from Ghana. And I tried it and I was like, delicious.
Chef's kiss.
You know, so I've just been so happy, so delighted by all of the food that we've had here. It's all been delicious. We recently had goat meat with sombe. And I was like, everything I eat here is just delicious. And so I will tell people, of course, about Rwanda as, I think, a shining star of what Africa is capable of economically and socially, politically, the unity that's been built over the past 30 years coming from where it did. Absolutely, I'll talk about, you know, the history and the culture and everything that we've already discussed. But I'll tell people, you come to Rwanda because the food is amazing as well, and you have to try it.
Yes, thank you very much, Jordan, for that. And Prim?
For me, I think it was the gorilla trek we did yesterday. So I have never done gorilla trek before, and that was my first time. And coming from so my country has a really big tourism industry as well. And to see how well organized the gorilla trek was, like how there's a briefing before we go on the trek. There's a I think it's just how organized and how transparent the system was very impressive to me. And as a tourist, I felt really safe. I feel like the guide know what he's doing and he can explain all the information to me. And I think for me, I was just blown away by the system, the tourism system here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Leila, from an arts perspective, what did you think about, I was asking you about your attire before we started the show, and the Made in Rwanda product. What do you think about the development? Rwanda has really been portraying itself in terms of having more products made in the country and exporting them, and that's something that we have really been investing in. What did you think about that in the arts perspective and culture?
This is a question that requires a return visit for me to properly answer.
Yes.
But I went to Kimirongo Market, and so this is made by Esperance.
Okay.
And it took her
Shout out
3
to
hours.
Esperance.
Yes, thank you, Esperance. I have her phone number. I can give it to you. She already took measurements and made custom outfits for about 5 other people in our group. I think that, and I know we've also been to House of Tayo, and I went to Enso, and I wanted to go to Motion. We didn't get a chance to go there. I realized that there's all these scales of kind of materials and products that are being made. I think it would be such a no-brainer. And maybe it's already existing in the sense of those businesses and economies, and I just don't know about it yet.
Yeah.
But I'm such a fan of human creativity and would want to know more about it. Yeah, and I think it absolutely could be another big part of the growth economy here.
Yes, I'm so glad you guys were able to visit the country, were able to learn so much more about the policies, governance, the education sector, the innovation technology sector, and so much more, as well as learning about the country in general, the history, and doing that on the ground as opposed to not only learning it in theory, but also practicalizing what you've learned and also seeing it for yourself and enjoying the culture, the food, the scenery. It's just something that you can only testify once you have experienced that, and that's just more of an incentive for you guys to come back, and I hope this won't be the last time you guys are visiting the country.
We'll be back.
Definitely. I'll hold you guys to that. So thank you once again to Layla, Jordan, and Prim for being here on the show. These were students from Harvard University, and they were able to explore Rwanda's cutting-edge development initiatives, as well as learn from the country's strategic approach to growth. And we cannot wait to have them back once again. This was the summit. See you on the next episode. Good evening.